Hello, the program time with the main events of the day. Today in the State Duma of Russia, a special session was held dedicated to the Chechnya problem. What is occurring among legislators we'll tell you in detail, but first about the events in the conflict zone itself. Our film crew continues to work in Grozny, and 1 hour ago we received a report. Today, artillery firing of central Grozny resumed with previous force. Methodically, whatever remains is being destroyed. The artillery cannonade was heard from the direction of the Cossack village Yermolovsk and the villages Zakhar and Tirnorovsk. On the outskirts of the city, on Freedom Square, bread was distributed. As in all recent days, Russian residents of Grozny, and they are in the majority here, came to the square in the hopes that finally buses or other vehicles would arrive and take them to safe areas. Today, however, only one truck arrived, which took the children and women. As was promised, a press conference was given by Jahar Dudayev. According to him, during the time of combat activity in Chechnya, 18,000 peaceful citizens died. Dudayev admitted that to defeat the powerful Russian war machine, Chechen armed forces will not be able, and there will be no victors in this war because mostly people suffer. Dudayev noted that between the Chechens and Russians there is no antagonism, therefore one stroke of a pen is sufficient to stop the senseless bloodshed. Residents of Grozny are concerned that tomorrow after 8 a.m., when the declared but severed ceasefire will expire, again storming will begin, and the armed forces of Chechnya are preparing for this. The statement of Jahar Dudayev didn't change much in essence. At one time, he himself didn't attend dialogues. Meanwhile, according to the press service of the government, Dudayev combat formations continue to provide stubborn resistance in Grozny. However, according to observers' assessments, a unified leadership of the unlawful formations in Grozny is practically non-existent. Meanwhile, as a correspondent of RIA News learned from military sources, a combined regiment of naval infantry is headed for Chechnya from the Pacific Fleet. The entire regiment, by the 13th of January this year, should arrive in the combat zone. Already, a convoy is headed there with combat transporters and other self-propelled technology of the naval infantry. The local population of Chechnya reacts to the actions of the Russian army in the zone of the conflict in various ways. Yes, many Chechens met the forces with shooting and automatic artillery fire. That is true, but it's also true that tens of thousands of local residents, with the fall of the Dudayev regime, connect their hopes for a return to a normal daily life. I don't know where people are going to now, what they're trying to achieve. What a pit. Here, we did have our own language, we had our own culture, we had everything, our own traditions, and an infrastructure existed. Salaries were received and pensions were received. It was wonderful. We lived in heaven. We hope that everything will work out well, and it should be. We need peace. We need peace. Last night, as a result of the operation of organs of military counterintelligence in Grozny, 13 prisoners of war from the 503rd Mortar Artillery Regiment were freed. The 19th Mortar Artillery Division of the Russian Army captured by Jahar Dudayev gunmen. Wednesday, this was reported to Interfox by the head of the Center of Public Communications of the FSK of Russia, Alexander Mikhailov. According to him previously, the 7th of January, 2 more prisoners of war were freed. Today, several deputies of the group, the Liberal Democratic Union, the 12th of December, sent an open letter to the President of Russia on the situation in Chechnya. Assessing the situation there, the deputies write, the unconditionally necessary actions to restore lawfulness and order have failed from a political, military, and propaganda point of view. Just before today's session of the Duma, there were many severe statements made by the deputies, but this does not always result in the adoption of corresponding decisions in the session's auditorium. Many members of the State Duma today, probably for the first time, learned of the dramatic events in Chechnya, not through sources of mass media, but firsthand, from their colleagues, deputies. True, in the beginning of the session, as in other days, factional and party interests prevailed, including demands for the resignation of the government and even self-suspension of the Duma. There were, of course, the eternal Russian questions: who is to blame and what must we do? And yet the awareness of the fact that Russia faces a real threat of territorial splintering if Dudayev is not stopped, according to the massive information not only from the barracks of the rebel general, factional interests subsided somewhat. I call for a legal basis to appear. The use of force is adequate to what we received in Chechnya in these complex situations. And this is called the civilized path and nothing else. No one, for now, at this time, is developing such laws, unfortunately, and they must be adopted immediately. This is our land. If we give away Chechnya, Russia will splinter. For some reason, every combatant there is smarter than all of you in the State Duma. Each combatant understands what he's fighting for. The violation of human rights by the participation of the Chechen conflict was stated by the Deputy Colonel General Yuri Rodionov. According to him, specifically, the right of life is violated, the right for housing and medical aid, and refined torture methods are used on Russian soldiers by Chechens. The faction press submitted its own version to resolve the conflict. It's included in a draft law on measures to politically regularize the conflict in the Chechnya Republic. Politicians in Moscow now must understand the entire depth of that abyss and agree that the political tussles from October the 17th, February the 17th, from August of 1991 should be put aside until the threat disappears to the territorial wholeness of the Russian Federation. The threat of separatism in Russia maybe doesn't exist yet in full measure, but is sufficiently recognized by parliamentarians. A prescription for the illness in the world is well known, that is, consolidation. First of all, we should increase the level of harmony within the State Duma in the face of this urgent and not local but common Russian problem. Today, the chairman of the chambers of the Federal Assembly were in the Kremlin meeting with the president and the premier. In the official announcement, it says that they examined the general political situation in the country and in the light of the latest events in Chechnya. Also, they assessed the condition of public opinion in the country, the position of the deputy corps, analyzing versions of launchings of restorational political and economic processes in Chechnya. In connection with combat in Chechnya, they discussed also the question of reorganizing the armed forces. The essence is that the general staff must be immediately removed from within the Ministry of Defense, subordinating it to the commander-in-chief, that is, the President of Russia. The general staff will have to be assigned the reorganization of the army. Then there will be someone answerable for why reform within the armed forces is not occurring. This was noted by the Speaker of the Federative Council. For now, considering public opinion and the deputies of the Federal Assembly, they examined the feasibility of creating a three-sided commission to clarify the circumstances under which in Chechnya such an enormous amount of Russian weapons was left behind. The faction, the Democratic Party of Russia in the State Duma, stated today that it will demand an investigation and the punishment of those individuals guilty in establishing and legalizing the criminal regime in Chechnya. And the journalist investigation has already begun, and immediately accusations against each other began as well. Yesterday in our program, the Vice Premier Yegorov stated that the involvement of the former Minister of Defense of the USSR, Shaposhnikov, was key in transferring weapons to Dudaev. Today, in written form, we received the response from the Marshal. Such a document, cited by Yegorov, does not exist. At least, not with my signature. What Yegorov says is yet another story from the series, will take Grozny in 2 hours, enter Grozny without a battle by the 5th of January, etc. And to the question, who is to blame for the decisions, we don't often get answers, and as a result, we have what we have today. A helicopter is being unloaded. It brought injured to Mozdok, peaceful residents evacuated from Grozny. In a few moments, they will be in the hospital, Zashita, or defense. Yesterday, such a helicopter brought a terrible cargo, 22 Russian soldiers, in cellophane bags, with their genitals cut off. In the symbolic language of the cruelty of the Middle Ages, that means, we'll cut you out and your families. Already dead, they were dumped near the location of our forces. In Mozdok, there is a place called Black Tulip. Together with representatives of the government press center, we stood there almost 2 hours. We saw a tent where those 22 soldiers were at the time and an unknown number of other casualties. We saw the stockpiles of cellophane coffins in wooden crates. Everything is here, just nearby. After long dialogues and appealing up and up the ladder to higher authorities, we were still not permitted to film. In the hospital, at that time, the injured were being aided. Among them were Chechens, Russians, and Armenians. The main physician here is Oleg Givilink. His specialty is emergency services. He went with his hospital through many conflict points. Together with the combat medical personnel, he received that horrible cargo. I entered that helicopter number 26, the enormous one, and there lay 22 cellophane packages with the boys. I can't. I can't describe it. It was just impossible to look at it. Yes, in this war we had to encounter fanaticism of the Middle Ages. I'm far away from the thought of suspecting the Chechen people in this. We ourselves saw a sufficient number of Chechens, not ascribing to the philosophy of cruelty. But those whom we called Dayevцы, that is, followers of the Daev, do they understand that they themselves and their leader and their fanaticism are only the trump cards in someone's sober, calculated game? Today we have an exclusive interview of the Director of the Federal Service of Counterintelligence, Sergei Stepashin. This material from Chechnya was prepared by our television agency, jointly with the state television radio company Kubani. The Director of the Federal Service of Counterintelligence, Sergei Stepashin, and the Chairman of the Interim Council of Chechnya, Umar Abdulkhanov, spoke at the rally at the Cherskaya station of the Novosk region of Chechnya. The railway force has already restored movement along that stretch. There will be no civil war in Chechnya, Sergei Stepashin told the press after the end of the rally. In January, everything which is connected with the combat operation must end. According to the director of the FSK in Grozny, in the near future, the Ministry of Internal Affairs will be employed and fulfill its direct functions, that is, the confiscation of weapons and the battle with crime. Although there will be enormous problems in the south, and because quite serious groups of gunmen have fled to the mountains in the south, and there are the former dachas of the district commanders, the city commanders in fortified regions. And unconditionally, the Ministry of Internal Affairs and we here will be setting up one of the largest departments of the Federal Service of Counterintelligence here, will have to work with that perhaps sad or maybe not so sad experience of the post-war period when there was a battle with gang formations. There's a lot of work to do. But the problems, evidently, will not be only in the south. Witnesses of the dialogue of the Russian officer with local residents, the television journalists, saw the relatively calm Novorsk region in the west of Chechnya controlled by the opposition. I know that here, behind that forest, there is a gang which comes during the night to the village. I know about this, and you know this very well. But the director of the FSK feels that the majority of regions is already beginning to live a normal human life. I was approached by the chairman of the interim council in the city, Gudarmes, on the instructions of the elders for me to go there. I agreed with Viktor Stepanovich, and I spoke with him, and there we will resolve the question whether the city is embarking on a normal life or not, recognizes the Constitution of the Russian Federation, and the main thing today is not combat action, the combat operation, but a normal life. Responding to the question about his attitude of mass media's coverage of the Chechen crisis, Stepashin stated, "Now, the lazy ones are the only ones not prodding mass media, therefore I won't touch that topic. I think we ourselves permitted a mistake here. In the very initial phases, we should have permitted Russian journalists access to the forces, so that they could work and objectively illuminate the situation from this side. There was a certain barrier, and they were not permitted, and the principle went into play, an eye for an eye." And the last thing, if we discuss mass media, I would ask, there is simply a human understanding of pain, grief, and sorrow, and when bodies are being shown constantly, this is not noble, not honorable. This is not accepted among Russians. Death is someone's tragedy, and to constantly use it to wind up people. I can imagine if a mother were to see her relative or son. Are we not people? The director of the FSK is convinced that after order is restored in Grozny, the tonality of sources of mass media will change. I must say that lately we have been receiving more objective information, although certain statements of the higher-placed officials even today do not coincide with that picture which we see on films from Grozny. We have stopped bombing of military objects in the city Grozny as of 1855 on the 24th of December last year. The president had forbidden the bombing, and after a few days we also reported to him minute by minute and concretely, and his repeated ban had no basis. The head commander of the Russian Air Force stated that competent organs will be able to find out about the actions of the aviation through recordings in the plane's black boxes and aerial photographs taken. They differ from those shot by lenses of television cameras on land. On those photographs, which were taken from on board of our reconnaissance planes on the 29th of December last year, there are no ruins of homes. At the same time, I don't exclude losses among the peaceful population, nor the destruction of those objects, but perhaps more specifically residential homes, because these attacks were launched in very difficult circumstances, and that is why we stopped them. Today it became known that the title Hero of Russia posthumously was bestowed on the captain Alexander Kiryanov, who with his body covered the commander of the regiment in Grozny during shooting. The injured continued to enter hospitals, and in Chechnya, our colleagues, journalists, continue to die. The Moscow correspondent of the German magazine Stern, the 30-year-old Johann Piest, died near the populous point Chervlone, 25 kilometers northeast of Grozny. Together with the German colleague was the photo correspondent of the Russian newspaper, Vladimir Sorokin, who was injured. And now about the condition of refugees. A new, not yet completed village near Vladikavkaz without water, gasoline, or heat is being settled by Cossacks, resettlers from Chechnya and Ingushetia of the first wave, which passed almost 2 years ago. For them, funded by the federal budget, this village was built at the Popov homestead. But these people managed to bring at least some domestic goods to their new residence and have roofs over their heads. But those who today are being received by the immigration services of Northern Ossetia, a far sadder demise has befallen. They have lost everything. Many, their close people. I'm a veteran of the armed forces, and now I am a pauper. Here's my sack and my glasses. I have nothing else. The government offers free passage to these people to their designated locations of residence. Dry ration tickets for 20,000 rubles per person. Our public, feeling compassion for them, yet is in no condition yet to provide concrete aid. We've become accustomed to that terrible word, refugee. Issues of restoring the economy and the overall normal life in Chechnya was the topic of a closed session in the Federative Council today. Participating in it were deputies from the Northern Caucasus region. The meeting was held on the initiative of the chairman of the Federative Council, Vladimir Shumeka. It, as was told the press, should facilitate the development of a plan to normalize the situation in the region. And today, the heads of the republics of the Northern Caucasus region met with Viktor Chernomyrdin. And so the premier, who until last week visibly didn't participate in the Chechen conflict by instructions of the president, has taken upon the entire spectrum of dialogues on himself. Today, representatives of 9 republics of the Northern Caucasus region arrived here. The premier wanted to hear the proposals on initial steps to restore the economy of Chechnya. The desire is natural because neighbors can see their immediate problems. However, it turned out that these neighbors were also victims. The economy, for example, of Dagestan was not in the best condition. Now it is simply critical. Essentially, the blockade of Chechnya became a blockade of adjacent republics as well. Railway communications have been destroyed. The Makhachkala airport has been closed. All deliveries occur only by automobile. The situation is affected by the load of refugees. And so in Ingushetia, 60,000 have gathered, and in Dagestan, around 40,000. Among those arriving, there are also people who are attempting to rock the situation. And Dudaev directly calls on people of the Caucasus to take up weapons. Of the first suggestions heard, the very first was a ceasefire, and later an attempt to restore, on the basis of the Supreme Soviet Dudaev dispelled, a legitimate organ of rule, capable of electing a government. Next was to immediately complete construction of residential villages. Viktor Chernomyrdin asked that systematized proposals be submitted by the 1st of February. Meanwhile, the chairman of the government gave certain instructions, placing under the responsibility of the Dagestani government to permit flights from Makhachkala, to liquidate salary debts, and to quickly resume train passage on restored stretches of the railway. Incidentally, the premier in the near future intends to visit the Northern Caucasus region. And more about the Premier's meetings. Today our correspondent managed to clarify interesting details of yesterday's meeting of Viktor Chernomyrdin with representatives of the Chechen diaspora in Moscow. Arkady Volsky was one of the organizers of it, and today he told our correspondent what stood behind the quite terse official statement. The Chechen diaspora continues to exert efforts so as to prevent any terrorist acts on the territory of Russia, including Moscow. The essence of those proposals is to create neutral zones, peace zones, excluded from combat in Chechnya, and that is through relinquishing weapons, not permitting gunmen into villages, regions, or cities. The essence of those proposals was to conduct dialogues with the Elders' Council, and in the Caucasus, as you know, the elders are always a real power and a wise power. They are considered to be so, and I must say that to many of these questions, Viktor Stepanovich gave positive answers. The second proposal which was developed, and that is that the head of the future republic, or the Chechen Republic, or executive power in general, not be appointed by Moscow. He should be elected at least either by the Elders' Council or by the prematurely suspended Supreme Soviet. That was also agreed upon. And finally, the fact that the 48 hours, which was the time designated, the brief time designated for the surrender of weapons for the withdrawal of gunmen, Viktor Stepanovich said this can be extended by 24 more hours, and I quote him, by another 24 hours. That is, it's evident from everything the dialogue process has begun. The international reaction to the situation in Chechnya. The situation in that region will be the topic of tomorrow's Vienna meeting of the Permanent Council of the Organization on Security and Cooperation in Europe. At the recent meeting of the heads of the countries and governments of the OSCE in Budapest, all countries adopted a so-called behavioral code, pursuant to which the countries which signed it promised to comply with certain principles in international and internal affairs. One of such principles is observing human rights, and in the West's opinion, Russia is violating that currently in Chechnya. After some cynical, as analysts note, silence regarding events in the Caucasus, the West has dumped a barrage of criticism on our country, and in many ways just criticism. This is not just criticism, but threats such as open calls to freeze credits promised to Russia. And there are more frequent statements that Moscow is regressing to the old days of empirical sovereignty, and in connection with this, the striving of the Eastern European countries is increasing to become members of NATO. The events of the last days clearly showed that some such intentions are materializing into concrete actions. This is proven specifically by the freezing of the ratification of the Agreement on Partnership and Cooperation between Russia and the European Union, and this agreement was designed to open the European market for Russian goods. Suspended also is our country's entry into the European Council. But it's comforting, however, that the majority of European countries intends not to suspend economic aid to Russia designated for environmental protection and the safety of nuclear power stations, housing construction for military servicemen, and many other projects. However, the common humanitarian values, and mostly human rights, are of greatest concern to Western politicians and social activists, and this occurs because Europe, just having been delivered of the inheritance of Cold War, truly fears immersion into a cold peace. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of France, Alain Juppé, spoke out against the proposal of the European Commission member Van den Broek to halt the trade agreement between the European Union and Russia because of the events in Chechnya. He pointed to the openness with which Russia is ready to discuss its problem on the international level, including within the framework of the Organization on Security and Cooperation in Europe. From the economic chronicle of the day, again attention is attracted by the condition of the dollar in Russia. The rate of the ruble against the American dollar in trading at the Moscow Interbank Currency Exchange fell by 29 points. The Bank of Russia, since the beginning of January, only sells currency to support the rate of the ruble. The International Monetary Fund gave its assessment today of financial processes in the republics of the former Soviet Union. Tempos in the growth of inflation in Russia last year comprised 204%. On an average in the world, tempos in the growth of inflation have reached around 25%, but Russia, compared to several other republics of the former Soviet Union, comparatively speaking, is not too badly off. In Ukraine, inflation has reached 850%, in Armenia, more than 5,000, in Georgia, 20,000%. And now the day today in Belarus. The president of Belarus again decided to bridle the severe financial steps embedded in his anti-crisis program in respect to the population. Increasing payment for communal services has been deferred to spring, and the frozen minimum salary has risen to 30,000 Belarusian coupons. However, these measures were not yet warmly received. The medical profession, teachers, workers of science and culture near the government building organized pickets demanding the re-examination of salaries of workers in the budget sphere, and the Federation of Professional Unions of the Republic for now hasn't cancelled its decision to hold protest acts at companies, because yet another jump in the prices of foods and services of more than 1.5 times will not cover even 1/4 of the necessary expenses. Meanwhile, the government does not conceal the fact that in January inflation will be no less than 50%, and new expenses threaten to fundamentally undermine the budget, which incidentally is just being adopted by the Supreme Soviet, and its deficit must be not more than 4%. And in the trade and within manufacturing, stockpiling of inventories is underway, which can negate the first successes in stabilizing industry, which one cannot strengthen by taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. The economy of the majority of the republics of the former USSR directly depends on deliveries of oil and gas from Russia. At the same time, in Russia itself, the procuring of raw materials is declining rapidly. Today, the Prime Minister, Viktor Chernomyrdin, met with representatives of the oil industry of the United States. An offer of long-term cooperation was made by one of the directors of the American company Mobil. This is one of the largest oil companies of the world, and Mobil is prepared to provide its European network on a long-term basis for the sale of Russian oil on the most beneficial terms for us, investing funds into developing the deposits of Sakhalin-3 and projects in Western Siberia and the gas line Yamal-Europe. Today we are interested in new technologies, and not only in the oil sphere. Volgograd, with a population of more than 1 million, has the same problems as other cities of Russia, and one of them is housing. In the city, there are almost 100,000 people on lists for improved housing, and these are basically those who have to hope in the government alone. The rest of the Volgogradians long ago understood the essence of the old saying, the salvation of a drowning man is the matter for the drowning man himself. In the city and district, an active individual construction has unfolded, which is restricted not so much by the absence of money, but mostly by the absence of construction materials. However, it will be simpler with materials, as this plant is launched, owned by the Russian Fixed Assets company. Here they will manufacture blocks of frothed concrete, an original technology, and the equipment for the manufacturing is created by Russian scientists and companies within the conversion program. The assembly of the equipment is underway in enormous hangars built in short time frames using American technology and on American aggregates of the manufacturing commercial firm Beat, also owned by the concern Russian Fixed Assets. Buildings built using this technology can be used for the most various applications and adapt them as hospitals, schools, residential homes, concert halls, and trade centers. Therefore, it is not excluded that in the near future, Volgograd will be the most rapidly growing city in Russia. Important news has just arrived from abroad. Croatia does not intend to extend the mandate of the UN peacekeeping forces, which expires the 31st of March. As a correspondent of Vitor Taz was told, this information is of a closed nature for now, but in the next few hours will be officially reported to the involved governments. And now a report from our personal correspondent who is on location in former Yugoslavia. The sensation of these days was the announcement of the possible changes in the strategy of the International Contact Group regarding Bosnian Serbs. It was said that the peace plan is no longer an ultimatum and is only the basis for future talks now. After yesterday's Paris meeting, the international mediators arrived today in Belgrade to speak with the President of Serbia, Slobodan Milosevic. To the question of our program, the Russian representative of the contact group, Alexander Zoltov, replied, "What involves the correction of the peace plan, as was spoken about yesterday in Paris? There was no correction. The peace plan remains in place. It will be pushed forward, and we want to begin the dialogue process." What can you say as the representative of the President of Russia regarding today's decision of Zagreb that they refused to extend the mandate of the UN forces. We'll speak about that in Zagreb. Tomorrow, the contact group will visit Zagreb, Pale, and Sarajevo. It will meet with the leaders of the Croats, Bosnian Serbs, and Muslims. The warring sides in Bosnia and Herzegovina continue to observe the New Year's truce, and the dialogue process resumed on all levels. The UN Security Council discussed today yet another report on Iraq from the President of the Special Commission on the Annihilation of Mass Destruction Weapons. In the document, certain progress is noted in receiving from Iraq necessary information in areas of biological, chemical, and rocket weapons. Thursday, the Security Council will meet again to discuss the possibility of loosening economic sanctions against Iraq. The Israeli army launched an operation against gunmen of the Hezbollah organization in South Lebanon. In the depths of territory controlled by Hezbollah, a reconnaissance group was deployed, which organized an ambush and exterminated several gunmen. Simultaneously, Israeli military helicopters, under the cover of destroyers, again attacked the discovered Hezbollah bases in the mountains of southern Lebanon. The decision of the British authorities to expel our correspondent Alexander Malika from the country produced wonder in the British capital itself. The attorney, Robert Blake, who spoke with the Russian diplomats in London, stated that the ambassador of Russia to Great Britain, Anatoly Adamyshin, met Tuesday with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Douglas Hurd, and stated on the highest level possible that Alexander Malika never belonged to intelligence organs or other special service divisions. The West, America, and the English now view Russia as a democratic country, a friendly country, and the action against Malikov is a jump into the past. In this concrete case, there is a serious risk that we may commit injustice through how the Minister of Internal Affairs uses his given powers. If we cannot convince the Independent Consultative Council, which Malikov now must face, we will go as far as the Strasbourg court. I hope that the public opinion will help us, but the situation remains complicated. At the end of the program, we wanted to tell you about celebrations, an anniversary in the Star Village, but there was no celebration, although there were events in space today. At 11:57 Moscow time, the delinking of the space station from the orbital complex Mir occurred, and I'll say immediately it was a success. The operation was clear. After problems with linkages, this was one more test of the automatic system. Also, observing the station from outside and a type of review are also important matters. But for me, the most interesting thing in the Center of Flight Control was that the directors of the space sector, Rumin Blagov Solovyov, spoke with me about events in Chechnya. And here's the very problem. The government, at the end of last year, owed an enormous amount of money to the space sector. Everyone waited, hoped, promised people. A year passed. There's no money, and evidently there will not be. Regarding the economy, I can say that this is a rather sad joke. I've already said it many times before any launching. I'm afraid that this is an avalanche situation because one thing after another will go and everything will collapse. And in the next year, according to rumors, even less is allocated. That means there is no money to develop the Russian space program. But to engage in combat, losing people and prestige, money is found. How strange. I think in our operation, all the internal resources within the space program, from the point of view of confidence here among our land services and personnel, we have exhausted all these reserves. Today, the Star Village turns 35 years old. There's no celebration, especially since the soldiers guarding the Star Village are called away, quite possibly to Chechnya. And yet, we'd like to believe that we will enjoy calm and joyous celebrations. I sincerely wish you this. All the best. In a moment, sports information. Good evening, friends. First, about international competitions in St. Petersburg. A match of the 1/8 finals of the Cup of the European Confederation of Volleyball for the men's teams took place. The local automobilist in 3 matches beat the Spanish Unicaja club. After 4 rounds of the first match in the 1/8 finals of the Championship Volleyball Cup between the Army and the German Bayer team, the score was equal 2-2, and everything was decided at the tiebreak. It was the better performance of the hosts, who had a win of 17-15, and with an overall score and a win of 3-2. The women's Army team in the tournament of tournaments at home is meeting the German Münster team. For now, the score is 1-1. The response match in 1 week in Germany. The race Paris-Grenada-Dakar is swiftly approaching its end. The race in the desert is a sandy nightmare for everyone and mostly for the racers. I'll remind you the rally finishes the 15th of January, and now more than 100 cars and motorcycles are out of the race. Today, the Kamaz crew, headed by Vladimir Marchenko, has finished, but it will not continue further. Everything is left to the leader of the competition, Viktor Moskovsky. A detailed report on Ostankino at 21:50. And now the hockey news. This announcement was awaited by all. The NHL season will take place after all, as was just reported to the journalist by the president of the Players Union, Mike Carter, and the Association of Players has agreed with the proposal of the Council of Team Owners, and the so-called collective bargain will be ratified. Today, matches were held in the International Hockey League in the Western Zone. Here are some of the results. The Army team of St. Petersburg lost at home to the Torpedoes from Yaroslavl 2-4, and the Voskresensky Chemist with a score of 2-1 beat the Torpedoes from Nizhny Novgorod, and the Moscow Wings team with the same result beat the Kazansky Club Itil. The Riga Pardaugava played 3-3 with the team Northern Stud, and the central match was undoubtedly between the Moscow Dynamos and Spartaks. In the middle of the first period, after the shot of Leonov, the score was 2-0 for the Dynamos, and later Kalevakin decreased the gap in the score, but in the end of the second period, the Dynamos increased their pressure, and first Prokofiev and later Nikalishin conquered the Spartak net. The game, as they say, was done with a score 5-1 for the Dynamos. Good evening. Tomorrow, the Baltic countries, the northwestern area, the central area, the Volgovyatsk regions, and Karelia and Arkhangelsk district will be under the power of a lethargic cyclone and its connected atmospheric fronts. Therefore, on this entire broad territory, it will be cloudy with some isolated snows and possible blizzards with icy roads. The coming snowfalls, finally, in the style of winter, will decorate nature to the delight of skiers. Because in the Baltic countries, the snow depth is only between 5 to 10 centimeters. In the central and northwest area of Russia, 15 to 20 centimeters, and only in Karelia and Volgovyatsk area, 30 to 40 centimeters. In the next 2 days, according to the meteorologists, the snow cover should increase by 5 to 10 centimeters more. Day temperatures -2 to 7. The Murmansk area, the Republic of Komi, the Nenetsk Autonomous District, and also the central Volga tomorrow will be under the influence of a high-pressure area zone. Here, it will remain mostly clear without precipitation. During the day, temperatures will be -2 to 7 degrees. The same weather is expected along the Ural area, Bashkiria, and the Perm district. This is the influence of a broad lethargic anticyclone whose center is over Lake Balkhash. During the day, -5 to 10. The cyclone, which I've already mentioned, has brought cloudy and windy weather with snow to Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, and to the Rostov district. Temperatures in Ukraine and Moldova -3 to +2, on the Don -2 to 7, in Belarus -1 to 6 degrees. In the Krasnodar and Stavropol Rim areas, Kalmykia, and over the lower Volga, in the republics of the northern Caucasus, unfavorable weather will continue. It will be cloudy with patches of rain and wet snow. In the Chechen and Ingushetian republics, icy roads. During the morning and evening, fogs in the mountains, a danger of snowslides. Temperatures at night will be around 0, during the day 0 +4. In the republics beyond the Caucasus, as previously, cloudy with some patches of rain mixed with snow. In Georgia, Azerbaijan, +3 to 8, in Armenia, around 0. In St. Petersburg, cloudy with periods of snow. During the day, -4 to 6. In the capital, it will remain clear with some patches of snow. Day temperatures -3 to 5 degrees. The prediction was compiled by the Oceanic Meteorological Center of Russia. All the best.